thrilled to launch its 2026 webinar series with our own member, Frances Carbonnel. As a renowned dressage instructor, trainer, and competitor since 1989, Frances has earned USDF bronze, silver, and gold medals, multiple WDAA World Championships, including Freestyle, and IALHA National Championships in disciplines like dressage, dama vaquero, and more. Twice named IALHA Horsewoman of the Year, owner of Classical Legacy Dressage, she specializes in classical principles, rider position, equine biomechanics, musical freestyle, and working equitation, with particular expertise in Iberian breeds like Andalusians and Lusitanos, including Grand Prix level competition on her Andalusian stallion Fino. Tonight, Frances will deliver an engaging talk, a brief historical overview of how riding systems and the Iberian horse evolved together, followed by the specific exercises and training methods of Guérin and other classical masters, exploring their purpose, application, and intended outcomes. Join us for an enlightening evening.
Yay! Thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. It's very much a pleasure to be here. That was a very, very lovely introduction and most kind. I am thrilled to be able to present to you some of the things that I've learned over the years about classical riding in many different places. I have studied with people from the Spanish Riding School in Vienna, also from the Royal School in Jerez in Spain, also a Spanish master named Don Luis Calderon, who was a specialist in Alta Escuela or high school. Spent quite a bit of time in France in my younger years and learned from the folks at Saumur. And lastly, I've spent quite a bit of time in Portugal in my later years, learning about how French classical equitation moved to Portugal and got preserved and embellished on. So I'd like to share with you the evolution of the Spanish and Portuguese horse and the riding system that went with it, and see if that can enlighten you a little bit about the nature of our horses and the special things that we need to do to ride them correctly for their breed, because they aren't like thoroughbreds and they aren't like warm bloods, but unfortunately most competition dressage riders are familiar more with those breeds than they are with the Spanish horses and the Lusitanos, and have no idea how to ride them according to their special needs. And many a horse has been ruined by being run off their feet, but using methods that were perfectly acceptable for a German horse, for instance. So what I want to go ahead, Lisa.
No, I'm just listening.
Oh, so did somebody? Pardon me?
You're starting to have an echo.
Oh, I'm having an echo.
That's okay. You go continue.
Okay. So what I wanted to tell you about is we go back to Xenophon a lot of times, and we talk about the Greeks and their enlightened civilization and how they talked about horses. And Xenophon very specifically said that it was not appropriate to use a horse roughly, to abuse him, or to be unkind to him, because it's an animal that has sensitivity, and he didn't say a soul, because I don't think the Greeks really thought of it that way, but that there was no beauty in the kind of equitation that resulted from force and struggle, and that he very strongly advocated for kindness and understanding of the animal, and really understanding the nature of the animal before you started to work on training it for whatever use you wanted for it. Those principles got lost for a long time during the Middle Ages. Things got pretty brutal in the Middle Ages, in the Dark Ages, we call them. People saw animals strictly as tools and as beasts of burden, and animals used to be used for war. They didn't even, some people didn't even believe they had feelings or sensation, even that they felt pain. So it was okay to do whatever you had to do to make them do whatever you wanted them for. And that changed only with the Renaissance. So around 1630 or so, Pignatelli and Grissone in Italy began to teach enlightened principles of riding based on gentleness, understanding the animals, biomechanics, and now, mind you, by our day's standards, they were still pretty tough cookies. They asked an awful lot of horses, especially war horses, because war horses had to be dependable. You know, in the middle of a battle with screaming and saber slashing and people charging and people dying and horses rearing and so forth, you had to be able to control your mount. And so they had some, by our today's standards, very severe methods of teaching a horse to be submissive to the rider. Some of those had to do with equipment, and some of it had to do with how they trained them. And it took several years to form a war horse. But it certainly was a lot better than the armored knight who got on and his armor weighed more than he did. And they put another 200 to 300 pounds of steel on the horse to keep him from getting sliced to pieces. And then all the horse could do was lumber forward at a trot with the guy clanking like a tin can up on top in a slow charge, side to side with his brothers with a lance, you know, and that was the cavalry of the Middle Ages. But with the Renaissance, we also saw the advent of the Moorish civilization in Spain. And they were there for a long time, 400 years. And they brought with them an equitation that came from North Africa and from Morocco in particular. They called it alajinete, and that was with saddle with a high pommel and cantle, but short stirrups, whereas the mounted knight with big heavy armor had long stirrups and was completely encased in metal. These guys were very, very little armor, very maneuverable with their horses. They had little barb horses from North Africa, and then those horses came over to Andalusia and mixed with the Iberian stock there, and formed a new breed, which was called for a long time the Spanish horse or the Iberian horse or the Andalusian. In fact, I went to Spain for the first time to understand these horses before the Spanish Breeders Association decided to brand their horses with the name PRE, Pura Raza Española. They were just Andalusians because the oldest blood and the purest blood was believed to be in around Jerez, and the monks there carried on bloodlines. And they still, in Jerez today, the Andalusian horse is valued at the Llegada del Hierro del Bocado, which is the brand of the bit. And that's where those horses were preserved and then grew out from there. Now the Spanish bloodlines are also more barb horses than that, more barb influenced than that. The Spanish did something very interesting under Carlos V. And that was they brought in horses from Naples and from the north, and they bred them with the Spanish barb and the local horses. And that is what is now known to have bred the pure Spanish horse, the Andalusian horse that everyone wanted in Europe, which was bigger, more beautiful, more hair, more brilliance, more presence, the horse that had the nobility drooling. Also very comfortable to ride. And also what the Spanish kings did was they banned bullfighting for 200 to 300 years. Whereas in Portugal, they did not. Those horses over there were essentially the same stock minus the infusion of the horses from Naples and from the north. And they were kept they kept their bullfighting roots. And so you see a lot of those horses, especially the Vega horses, smaller, very quick, extremely sensitive, and but with an entirely different focus on their training because they had to be agile to get away from the horns of a bull. Whereas in Spain, they used them for the feria and for the court celebrations called carousels. And carousels were great, huge things, productions of mounted noblemen that everyone showed off their horses' prowess in things like the Levade or the Capriole or the Courbet or the Terre or other movements that we don't do anymore, but it was for showing off, and they were comfortable horses. They were made for extreme collection, whereas the Lusitano was made for not only collection but extension, because you got to be able to scram fast when the bull's coming at you. So there's a little difference in the selection of the bloodstock for those two breeds, and they really are two breeds different now. Although when you go to Portugal today, you can still see some horses that you'd swear they were Andalusians. And of course, now the Spanish are breeding bigger Ranger horses that unfortunately are starting to look like warm bloods. So we have to be very careful as to what we select our horses for, because in 3 to 4 generations we can change the phenotype of a horse. This is beyond recognition sometimes. Now, I want to show you some pictures from a book that I have, which I bought in France back in 1970 something. And it's an anthology of equestrian literature. Of course, it's in French, so it doesn't help anybody who doesn't speak French, but I have perused it a lot, and there's things from Grisson and Pignatelli and Saunier and Laguerinière and the Duke of Newcastle. A lot of people from the 16th and 17th centuries, when the high school was the great entertainment of the noble of the court. And that's where the carousels all happened. And they had two different kinds of horses. They had war horses and they had carousel horses. They didn't usually use one for the other because the needs were very different. What we often say is the origin of the leaps above the ground, we say that that's from the war horse. But I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of literature in those old books that talks about that as just things that people did for entertainment, not just for war. Maybe you taught your horse Spanish walk and you taught him to kick or to do the capriole to clear out a space for yourself in the middle of the battle because nobody wanted to get hit with flying hooves. But to do a levade, or the horse had to sit very definitely and protect his belly with his feet underneath him, not up here going boxing. So some of the things that they did were to train young noblemen through entertainment for the battlefield. And it was considered an essential part of a nobleman's education to become a good rider because it taught forbearance and courage and understanding of another creature, and a lot of things that spoiled young noblemen needed to understand in order to be able to be effective as cavalry officers. Because the nobles were the cavalry officers, and then there was, if at one point, there really wasn't much of a cavalry that wasn't officers. And then as we got into the time when firearms became more important, then we had the troops and we had the officers. And the troops were commoners, and the training of their horses was to ride in groups or blocks of riders, and they were commanded by a cavalry officer whose horse was more highly trained. But the airs above the ground all went away at that time. So that became, again, the entertainment of the officers at the cavalry school among themselves. And you see that in Saumur, especially still today. Those are cavalry officers in the army. So what I wanted to show you was what the kind of equipment was that they used for these horses and what they asked of these horses in their training. Now, most of these horses were not large, and people weren't very big either at that time. They were horses were probably about 14 hands, and people were about 4'10" to 5 foot, maybe a little taller. So when we get into the idea of the great big horses we ride today, we struggle a little bit with the training methods that they had for these smaller horses. First of all, they used a saddle, which I have a copy of here. This is a Portuguese saddle. It's a bullfighting saddle. But this is what people rode in to do their everyday schooling and teach their horses and to ride in the carousels, and in going to war, something very similar, maybe even more descent coming down here and coming down here to hold the rider in. My golly, when you got into one of those saddles, you didn't get out easily. So there wasn't, having a good seat was helped enormously by your saddle. But La Guérinière and all of the others at that time, especially the Duke of Newcastle, talk about the importance of a good seat and perfect balance in order to not ruin the horse's mouth. And that they could not balance, if they could not balance themselves, then they were going to create a horse that was kind of a nervous wreck, that would toss his head, prance, and go sideways and not be, or back up and refuse to go forward. Some of the spurs and the bits that they used would make your eyes pop these days. And I'm going to show you some of that. So you've seen this saddle, and I don't know, can you see this picture? Is everybody able to see a little bit of that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see that there's several different saddles? The one on your right is the Sella Piqué, which is very much like the Portuguese saddle I have. And then they have other saddles, and you can see the English saddle too. See the English saddle that's on the over here?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And then down here, I want to show you, they have a cavesson right here.
Okay.
And that cavesson is made out of iron. It's the cavesson de fer. Right here. Here it is, and there's the lead rope that goes with it. And I'll show you that. It's still in use in Portugal and in Spain today. And it has a very specific use for helping start young horses. So here is mine. And it is, you can see the noseband of it. It is not jointed except down here, but from here to here it is a solid piece. There are 3 rings on it, or 2 for reins and 1 for a lead rope. And this swivels. This is placed on your horse's head above the where the cartilage joins the nose. You don't want to put this down on the horse's nose so far that it hurts the cartilage. It can break it. And then this throat latch here goes underneath the cheeks of the horse, so that you make very certain that this, and you buckle it down so that it's not so tight that it hurts the horse. This is padded right here. And then you want it to be able to move a tiny bit, but not slide around on the horse's face and not getting in his, hurting his nose or getting in his eyes. And this is right here prevents that. Are you all familiar with that piece of equipment? Hello? Uh-oh.
We're just muted so that we could
Okay.
not interrupt you, but yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was muted. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's great. Okay, so what this piece of equipment allows you to do is move the horse's skull on his neck bones from the front so that when he turns his head, he doesn't twist it. So instead of with a snaffle, a lot of times when you're working with a young horse and getting him used to the bit and you ask him to do flexions to the side, they'll cross their jaw, they'll twist their head. They don't easily understand how to do this. But this particular piece of equipment is really wonderful for that. The only problem that you have with it is if the horse learns to throw his nose up in the air, you got no brakes. Okay? So when you ride a horse with this, which is, it has ring for reins on either side, you want to have the reins that go to your hand. The Spanish call them riendas falsas, false reins. And then they use a curb bit that goes down below it. And that is, in the beginning, just by the weight of it to help the horse to find a position toward the vertical where the bit doesn't bear on his tongue. Now this is a Spanish bit. Oops, sorry, I've gotta get rid of this strap here. This is a Spanish bit that is from Spain, and you can see it has a little weighted place here. And it is very well balanced to help a horse just literally fall into a natural headset. And so you put your reins on the bottom here and keep them loose in the beginning, but you turn your horse with the cavesson from side to side. And then this is for bringing the nose in or rocking the horse back. In the beginning with the gentlemen that trained horses for war and so forth, they used that a lot. They put the horses around a center pillar. Here's a picture of some of that. You notice up in the front and the top one, the horse is not tied, but they have him getting used to being near the pillar, and they're asking him to sit back on his haunches and lift his front end and sit. And then at the bottom, you can see how they have actually tied him with the cavesson to they haven't actually tied him to it, but they've got there's a ring with a swivel on it so that they can teach the horse to submit to that. Now, we talk about submission today as something that is conditional sometimes, but these guys needed their horses to submit to them without question when they're going to battle. So as you can see that saddle, can you see how hard that would be to get out of on that horse? So now you see these guys, they're not necessarily beating this horse, but they're teaching that horse to give to the instructions of the rider. And I want to show you the bit that they use, because the Spanish bit is a very pale cousin to what they actually used. And this will blow you away. Look at the length of the shanks on this bit. And if you notice, there's some that are straight shanks and some that are kind of curved shanks. There's different mouthpieces down there at the bottom. And the shanks were probably 7 to 9 inches long. So what you have here is something that's heavy, that asks the horse to carry his neck up in order to carry it, and then to bring his head to the vertical so that it doesn't bear on his bars of his mouth and on his tongue. And I thought, my God, when I was in France, I got in with a bunch of friends who had an interest in this kind of equitation. And one of the men actually built one of these bits for a horse that he had that had been smuggled across the Pyrenees from Spain, back when you couldn't get Andalusians legally. And he made one of these, and we tried it on his. We thought he was a North African barb, but he was a beautiful bay horse with a lot of mane. And what we saw was really startling, because number one, the movement of that bit was very slow. And so the horse could feel with his whiskers when that shank was starting to move before he ever felt it in his mouth and in the curb chain. And it's very similar to the vaqueros of California and Mexico, that old Spanish vaquero style with the spade bit. Although these mouthpieces are not like a spade, some of them were. So it's a different feel. The idea was that you could move your hand like this and have a horse react, turning its head, moving its head. But it was started with the cavesson to teach it to move its head and to flex laterally and then longitudinally this way. And then with this particular arrangement of the long shanks and the cavesson, you had a lot of support for the horse's head. You were able to lift the horse's shoulders, and you were able to flex the horse a lot side to side. Now, in the beginning of training, this is the Duke of Newcastle. He was a precursor to La Guérinière. And if you notice how much he has turned the horse's heads, there's a lot of flexion going on there. And notice how far under the horse's hind feet come from the very beginning. Now, these guys wanted a forward horse, but they wanted a horse that went forward with the hind legs under and the balance shifted to the hindquarters. So extended trot was not something that was in their vocabulary. Just wasn't. And if you do Alta Escuela in Spain, they've changed somewhat in the last 30 years, but 30 years ago when I first started going over there, their horses had very short trots and very elevated trots. And that's a lot of the breeding of our Spanish horses in the beginning. We used to say, well, they look like little sewing machines. And that was the criticism that the Germans made of Spanish horses. But it was based on the fact that these horses were asked from nearly the beginning, as soon as they were able to carry a person and could go walk, trot, and canter, they were asked to start placing the weight on their hindquarters, rocking back and putting their weight on their hindquarters so that they could do airs above the ground, or they could do extremely collected things like gallop and passage. And here's a picture right here. If you notice how much these horses have themselves rocked, they are rocked back on those haunches, how flexed those haunches are, and how elevated the neck is. And yet you see the length of the bit. So this is the Baroque equitation that this is Gaspard Saunier, who was La Guériniere's predecessor at the court. But what the real revelation was that La Guérinière added was they pull on the shoulder in. And if you notice how the horse is bent around the rider, not so extremely as with the Duke of Newcastle, but rocked back and using its haunches, elevating its shoulders, but with a much less bend of the neck and much more bend in through the rib cage. This is a very important thing because that's where our modern dressage starts from, is that épaule de dos, the shoulder in, the way that the horse bends its body around the rider's inside leg. Now, the Duke of Newcastle talks all the time about using the inside hand and the inside leg together. And he insists on it. But you have to understand that the equipment that he used, which is the cavesson, to flex the horse's nose to the inside, can only be used that way. There's no such thing as an outside rein with that equipment. It's different than a snuffle. Okay, so as we go further along into history and the English horse becomes more in vogue, and cavalry became needing to be able to go forward and run forward quickly over hedges and jump things, and they had pistols and light lances for use as in close combat. The English horse that became the thoroughbred, which is a cross between the Turcoman horse and the Spanish horse. Those horses became longer, leaner, and they had different needs for riding. And then dressage evolved again into training those horses to be more able to lengthen and shorten with more extension and be able to run fast, stop, and then extend and extend and extend in a charge. Whereas the horses from the court stuff was all in collection, sitting back, sitting on the haunches, turning on the haunches, lifting the forelegs. And so by the time we get to the 19th century, we have pretty much lost the old Baroque equitation, which is that extreme rocking back on the haunches. And the Spanish horse, or the Iberian horse, I should say, went out of vogue. People were enamored of the English horse, the thoroughbred, and they did not want Spanish horses anymore. And they only in a very few places were they kept alive. The Spanish riding school in Vienna, and in Andalusia and in Portugal are three places where that riding still found favor and was useful for working with cattle on the Iberian Peninsula. The Spanish horse was at a bit of a disadvantage because he had been bred for elevated prancy gaits at the court. You could sit on them for all day like a couch, but they didn't have any speed to them. So when you watch Doma Vaquera, are you all familiar with Doma Vaquera? Okay, well, when you watch Doma Vaquera, most of those horses are not purebred Spanish horses. They are three blood or tres razas, which is a combination of Spanish, English, and Arabian bloodline. So that's the Spanish breeder and cowboys' solution to breeding what the Lusitano was bred for during the 200 years that they bred for elevated gaits. So in talking about all of this, what I think is very important to remember is that if you have a Spanish horse or many Lusitanos, they are still capable of sitting down and extreme collection. They can do levades, they can do caprioles, they can do all those wonderful things. And when you ride them, they need to be ridden with consideration for the fact that they don't, a lot of them are not happy doing an extension naturally. It's something you can teach them, some of them and some not, by their conformation. And the more baroque the type, the less extension in the trot you're going to get. But that's function of their breeding. And was once upon a time that was something very valued. Now, not so much. But and then the Lusitano horse has been more favored recently in the dressage ring because they had bred more for the elasticity of the gaits in front of the bull. So are there any questions about all of that stuff? Yes, no, maybe? No, I said Lisa says no. Okay. Lisa, there's a whole other discussion that we could get into about the influence of the Spanish and the Lusitano and the Soraya horse on American breeds. I think that's for another time, maybe. But some of the exercises that you can bring to your horse today to help them with increased collection, which makes them more supple. One of them has been, I don't how many of you are familiar with the training methods that Bruno Gonzalez and Tina Reeder have been preserving and proposing for riding with their Baroque equestrian games? Well, if you aren't, I think Bruno has done a lot of the work that is very painstaking about finding out what these old masters did. Now, he does not use a pillar. He does not put horses on going around the pillar either with the haunches towards the pillar or the shoulders towards the pillar, which was very common back then. But he does use things like riding straight into a corner, then backing up along the wall straight, and then making a quarter turn on the haunch and trotting off or cantering off. And teaching the horse to come into the corner. When the horse comes into the corner, especially if it's in an indoor arena where the arena is, the wall is right there and right here, the horse comes in, he's going to go, wow, you're going to send me right up to that wall. He's going to put his neck up and he's going to lift his shoulders and he's going to sit down. And you'll have your horse on your haunches just by the fact that you're using that for an exercise. You don't want to run the horse into it, scare him to death, but if you walk him up to that or trot him up to that and ask him to stop straight and then back up, he's already on his haunches for the rein back, can lift his front feet up. If he can't lift his front feet and starts to drag them, what is a very common thing to do is to have a second person there with a little piece of bamboo to just tap them on the front of the pastern or on the cannon bone. So they bend their legs and pick their feet up as they back up. And that helps a horse learn to flex all those joints. And then when you do the turn on the haunch to the side, you're teaching the horse to be mobile in his shoulders. A lot of the problems with that exercise come from the horse backing up crooked. And when you first start doing that exercise, a lot of times people try to move the haunches back into place and get them back behind the shoulders. And in fact, what you need to do, because when you do that, when you move the haunches, you immediately put the horse on the forehand. But if you can put your horse's shoulders over in front of those haunches that are starting to slide to one side, then the horse learns that he needs to continue to bend his hind legs and you supple the shoulders at the same time. Bruno has a number of other exercises that are very effective, like riding into the corner, backing up, and then backing around in a 90-degree turn, and then stopping, turning the horse so he's going forward again, and taking off at a canter. That is a very effective way of helping the horse to find its lead and to engage the inside hind in a beautiful canter depart without being run into the canter. And this is something that can be done slowly, but with horses that are relatively green, and it works wonders on their balance and the exercise itself teaches the horse the willingness to go forward, the need to use its hindquarters to get underneath itself. And if you use a ground person to help them learn to back up properly so that they lift their front legs, bend their knees in their pasterns, and reach back with their front legs instead of dragging them stiffly, then you have all um, the precursors of beginning to piaffe and passage. And this is an exercise that can lead very easily into piaffe and passage. If you do working equitation, you notice that there's a lot of sideways movement with horses over poles. They have also an obstacle where you weave through poles, stop, pick up a pitcher, weave back through the poles, and put the pitcher on the poles behind you. That too teaches you how to maneuver the shoulders and the haunches. And the trick to that particular maneuver is to make sure that the shoulders are mobile, much more so than trying to move the haunches. So it capitalizes on the natural propensities of the Iberian horse to sit and to rock back and to lift the forequarters in collection to be able to become extremely maneuverable. And those things that we do in working equitation are, by their nature, a roadmap for training horses to become supple and more maneuverable and more pleasant to ride. I have a little Gypsy Gunner Cross horse that I bought in October. We've been putting him through the obstacles, and he's transforming himself from a little plunky little thing to something that's very getting to be quite handy. So the exercises themselves are good for other breeds as well, even that little fellow who hasn't got a drop of Spanish blood in him. But my Lusitano horse has learned through some of the practicing of those exercises a lot more ability to make great transitions in and out of piaffe and passage, which the exercise itself doesn't teach, but it bleeds on over into when you're training for that. So I'm asking you if you all have any questions. With that, I don't want to bore you with anything more about history, but I think it's very important that we maintain the breed characteristics of our horses, that we don't try to breed them into warm bloods, that we keep them as Iberian horses for the original bloodlines and what they were intended for. We may not fight bulls anymore, thank goodness. I'm not a proponent of bullfighting, but being able to use working equitation as a substitute is kind of a nice thing. Our Spanish horses are wonderful horses for exhibition and spectacle. And if we can create associations where we can get together and have play days where we can show off our horses and in costumes and do things like that, and maybe have our own little carousel, we can preserve the historical strong points of our horses and enjoy the historical things that our ancestors used to do. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to try and present some of this to you. I hope it's been of interest to you, and I'd like to know if you have any questions.
I thought you did an excellent job on everything, and it was very nice
loved
to
it.
hear it. So thank you so much for giving us that historical lesson.
Well, thank you. I hope that you can enjoy it with your horses. If anybody would like to know more, I'm always available.
Where do you live?
I live in Tallahassee, Florida.
Okay.
So, and I can hop on a plane or get in the car. I like very much to do clinics with people to show them the flexions and the work in person, because this is just an overview, but there's so much to be done. And you see the horses improve literally overnight. I have two ladies that are down with me from Kansas City and from Wichita, and one has an Andalusian horse, is PRE, I should say, and the other has an Oldenburg, and that Oldenburg mare is stiff. But we've been putting her through some of these exercises, and she's becoming more supple. Her owner has her at Pre-St. George right now, but she goes typically pretty stiff and pretty croup high. And we're already teaching her how to use her hindquarters better. And I think the goal for her is to use these exercises to increase the collection and the suppleness of her mare. And then when she goes to compete with her, hopefully her scores will be better.
Mhm. That's one of the things that I've seen a big change in. I literally just had a call before I got on this call with the lady who is the head of the IDCTA in Illinois. And I was telling her about going to do you were going to listen to your webinar. And they have a series of webinars. But watching people just in the last year since the Opus Vertical One documentary came out, seeing people go back to some of these exercises, the simple use the corner, which is like, I mean, that goes all the way back to the beginning of classical training. And, now everybody is like embracing their corners again. I love it.
Yeah, when I first started riding dressage, using your corners meant going deeper into them. It didn't mean using them like this exercise of Bruno's at all. And
Oh, yeah.
and I mean, I've studied with a lot of people over the years, Charles de Comfy and um, Hilda Gurney, and some of the greats of the competition world, and um, it wasn't even on the radar. So it's wonderful that we're seeing this coming back. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the German riders and Dutch riders have, for years and years and years, gone to Spain and Portugal in secret to ride the lighter horses and learn from those folks, learn the mastery of those horses, and take it home. And that's been some of the reason why the German breeds have gotten lighter and more maneuverable and more rideable, is because they drank the right Kool-Aid.
So I had a question. There seems to be an epidemic of hock injections. Um, so is that the biomechanics of the horse being able to do that kind of maneuver, or I mean, how are these exercises on the joints of the horse?
These exercises are designed to strengthen the joints of the horse. The reason a lot of the hock injections are going on now, I mean, we get hock injections in reining horses because they put so much stress on their hocks, asking them to slide and having hocks that are weak. And if a horse is weak at all in the hindquarters, it just tears up their hocks for a slide or a spin. Now, in the dressage world, if you have had your horse going in rollkur, what happens with rollkur is you put the horse behind the vertical, he cannot lift the thoracic sling, and the hind legs go out behind. And so that takes a lot of stress on the horse's hind limbs, particularly the hocks and stifles. What happens is a lot of suspensory injuries that happen that way too. And in all my years of training, and I've been training for close to 50 years now, I have never had to inject a horse's hocks. And I have a 27-year-old stallion out in the field here who is retired because he has no more front teeth. But his hocks are fine. And if Marie watched him bopping around in the pasture the other day because she was trail riding in an adjacent pen, and she said, "My God, what do you do with this? Or how do you get him to be 27-year-old with hocks like that?" And I said, "Well, training him in accordance with his biomechanical nature. You know, roll-cur is not, there's nothing natural, and there's a lot of desperately bad things wrong with roll-cur. Fortunately, that is getting to be less and less the real thing that people do, but it's still around, and that and too deep a footing. Too deep a footing can really mess with a horse's joints too. 2 inches of sand is kind of an ideal, even for bigger horses. You want to have enough cup that you have a little bit of ability for the horse to have a grab, but not so deep that it puts a lot of strain on the tendons and on the ligaments and on the joints. Also, I think that what we have known for a long time is that horses' joints mature a lot later than most of us had thought before. Now, biomechanics will tell you that hocks and stifles mature probably between the ages of 3 and 4 and 5 even. Those joints are not, the joint capsules are not mature, the joint bone ends are not finished fusing to the cartilage. And when you work those horses in collection too soon, you put enormous amounts of stress on that, and especially these big horses that have so much weight and mass and momentum with huge joints, huge movement. What we're talking about with these little horses from the Baroque era was horses that didn't get started till they were 6 or 7 because they knew that horses were not ready to go until then. They did not put them in collection until then. They kept them out in the field. And in Portugal, colts stay out in the field until they're 3.5. They hardly even halter break them. They let them grow up. They let those joints and bones fuse, and they don't. You ask people if they do a lot of hock injections in Portugal, it's almost unheard of, and it has a lot to do with horse management, I think. There may have something to do also with breeding. You know, whether you've bred horses that are maybe a bit defective in their bone quality, but. I do not believe that these exercises they're done at the walk first until the horse is good. And then you can do them at the trot. And you don't wrestle your horse around and harass them. If the horse can't do it, you go back to the walk and start it over again until the horse can get strong enough to do the work.
I did notice that Tina and Bruno keep their training sessions very short.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you can do 20 minutes twice a day with your horse, and that's what the old masters did. That's what I was always taught when I was in France too. Work your horse 20 minutes. You warm them up for 20 minutes. You work them for 20 minutes. You cool them down for 10 to 20. If you could turn them back out in the pasture, you don't necessarily need the cool down quite as long or the warm up quite as long. But if you take them out of a stall, that's how you spend your hour. And you're training, teach the horse something. Don't drill him into boredom and disgust. Teach him something and let those bones and muscles and sinews mature, and the horse will tell you when he's ready to move to the next step.
What kind of things do they do with the horses after they get them out of the pasture from that time to riding time?
Well, first thing they do is halter break them, which is, you think, oh my God, a 3-year-old that hasn't been halter broken. But it's really quite surprising how quickly they do that. And a lot of it has to do with the use of the cavesson, because when you put the pressure underneath the horse's chin and he pulls back, he's going to put a lot of pressure in the back of his poll, especially between the second and third vertebrae. And that area is very vulnerable in horses. That's where it begins to arc down into the neck. So you have the pole up here, and the bones go like this and into the spine here. And this is the crest of the horse. And that second to third vertebrae right there, if you put a lot of stress on it and the horse pulling back with his from underneath, you can injure the horse's pole very, very easily there. And same thing with putting a lariat in wrestling. I've never seen anybody use a lariat to catch a horse in Spain or Portugal. But what they do by holding them from the nose is they'll run along with them. And or they might ride a horse and pony them alongside, but so that the horse is not pulled from underneath, but rather encouraged to go forward, and then they use this to bring the horses here where they're in a position they're in the natural position that the horse would take in the field.
Well, I just like to thank you.
That's a great question.
Huh.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this really great webinar. I'm looking forward to sharing that with the other members. Um, and yes, this has been invaluable.
Well, I'm happy to be of assistance as a resource to anybody. You know, I'm getting older. I'm almost 77. I'm getting to the point where I'd like to pass a lot of this stuff on before I get senile or get debilitated. And so use me while you can. I'm happy to save it and give it as much as I can to anybody who wants.
Oh, look
Thanks
at Dolly.
again.
She just turned 80.
What?
I said Dolly just turned 80.
Oh my God. I can't believe it. I didn't think she was that much older than I was, but yes, there's another one who's going to be living and sticking around forever, huh?
Yeah.
That's
Thank you so much, Frances. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for your time tonight, and I hope I get to see you in person soon, all of you.
Yes.
Okay, we'll be down.
Okay, come on down. Come down. I have a spare bedroom.
Okay.
I'm already
All right.
here. I'm on the way over.
And
Good
you know
night.
what? Love,